Ms. Klein, the recently released 5-year plan for offshore oil and gas leasing includes the fewest lease sales in history. And your department brags about that. They're very pleased with themselves. This is the headline, your department press release. Reflecting America's rapid and accelerating shift to clean energy, Interior Department announces fewest offshore oil and gas lease sales in history in proposed final program for 2024 to 2029. So that's your bragging, and that's your position. It also suggests that you are holding those fewest sales solely, not for oil and gas, but for the purposes of enabling the offshore wind program to continue. That's what your release says. So in your view, is there any reason ever to hold offshore oil and gas lease sales other than to ensure that the Bureau can hold offshore wind lease sales?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Senator. The proposed final program, obviously, is a decision by the Secretary based on what she believes to be the nation's energy needs in the next 5 years, based on a number of factors she's required to consider in OXLA. The Inflation Reduction Act gave us very clear direction about how we link oil and gas lease sales to the offshore wind program, and we've proposed the minimum number of sales needed to continue to expand our offshore wind leasing program into the future. The President's made clear that climate change is a crisis that he believes the federal government has a responsibility to do something about, and the transition to clean energy is something that this administration is very focused on.
So it sounds like you, as director of our nation's offshore oil and gas program, actually doesn't think there should be any offshore oil and gas program. Ms. Klein, the Biden administration is now lifting sanctions on Venezuelan oil. This is the administration that you just talked about. Now, the oil produced in Venezuela ranks among the worst in the world in terms of carbon intensity, while production in the Gulf of Mexico is among the best. Is it better for the environment for oil to be produced in the Gulf of Mexico or in Venezuela?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the documents and the analytical documents contained as part of the proposed final program go into some detail about the emissions associated with Gulf of Mexico oil development. We walk through that, and we agree that the analysis shows that the emissions are lower for upstream production associated with Gulf of Mexico oil and gas resources. When you consider the full life cycle emissions of upstream and downstream production, the numbers are different. The proposed final program from the Secretary's perspective meets the energy needs for the next 5 years.
So oil from Iran, oil from Russia also rank near the bottom in terms of carbon intensity. I mean, you're summa cum laude from college, summa cum laude from law school. This is a simple question. Is it better for the environment for oil production if it occurs in the Gulf of Mexico or Iran and Russia and Venezuela? Which is what the President is asking for and allowing.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think a lot of the feedback we received is that it might be better for the environment if we transition to clean energy sources.
So you're refusing to answer the if or, but what you're saying, the President's decision to go to Iran, to go to Venezuela, to go to Russia is okay and better because you're shutting it down in the Gulf of Mexico, so we just don't have it here. So the administration's efforts to choke off new oil and gas lease sales on federal lands and waters, they're bad for our national economic security. They're bad for the environment. These anti-American energy policies are more than misguided. They are shameful, and you're smart enough to know that. Ms. Coit, last month, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management attempted to impose major travel restrictions on ships servicing oil and gas operations in the central and western Gulf of Mexico in order to protect Rice's whale. I would note that ships servicing oil and gas operations make up less than 10% of the total ship traffic in the Gulf. That means 90% of the ship traffic, nothing to do with oil and gas production. Can whales tell the difference between the ships servicing oil and gas operations and other ships?
Turn your mic on, ma'am.
Thank you again for that question. The endangered Rice's whale, one of the threats to that whale is from ship strikes, vessel strikes, and the opportunity for us to mitigate those impacts occurs when we consult with other federal agencies. We're trying to reduce threats to the unendangered whale as required under the Endangered Species Act.
But you didn't answer the question. Is there any rational basis for imposing restrictions on the ships that service the oil and gas operations, but not on the other 90% of the ships that travel in the same area?
I believe the rational basis is that under the Endangered Species Act, we're dealing with federal agency actions, and most of those other other ships are not going to be something that's approved by the federal Department of the Interior.
It's not then a rational decision. You feel you're mandated by law to do that, but it's not because those 90% of the ships that are still allowed to go are safer ships than the other 10% that are the oil and gas ships. Okay. So this chart shows all of the confirmed suspected sightings of the Rice's whale last 20 years. The black dots are confirmed sightings. Most of them are over there where we see the Florida coast and under Alabama. There's this one dot way over here by Texas. An enormous gap between the sighting and the whale's known habitat off the coast of Florida. We know they're over there. We know that and understand that. Is it your position that activities in areas where there have been no confirmed sightings at all, they need to be restricted too in order to protect the Rice's whale?
The Western Gulf has just a few sightings, as you state. It also we have a record of passive.
Well, there was one sighting, and it was 6 years ago. Yeah.
Well, we've actually believe we've seen a bunch this last summer as well, and we have passive acoustic monitoring that demonstrates that there are Rice's whales there. They have a distinctive call, and they are there 12 months of the year in the Western Gulf. So we're confident from the latest and best available science that they are in the Western Gulf.
So do we need to block off all this area in between? I just want to clarify.
It looks like your map is related to our proposed critical habitat, and that is not blocking off the area. It's simply identifying habitat that's important for their feeding and survival.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. Thank you.
Senator Heiners.
Ms. Klein, I wanted to go back to Vineyard Wind 1 and South Fork.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Klein, last week before the House, you were asked some questions. One was about your involvement in the voluntary settlement agreement involving the Rice's whale in July. You avoided the question, so please just yes or no. Were you consulted, informed, or otherwise involved in the settlement agreement involving the Rice's whale?
Well, thank you for the question. There is, from BOEM's perspective, we share NOAA's concerns about the status of the Rice's whale in the Gulf of Mexico, and we put forward some voluntary recommended measures in a notice to lessees to try and address potential impacts to the Rice's whale.
So you were consulted by what you just said. So I'd note that the lawsuit at issue did not involve your agency. So was the decision to impose restrictions on the leases and remove 6 million acres from the lease sale 261 a coordinated effort across the administration? Or was it principally your decision as the director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management?
Well, thank you for the question. Again, we proposed some what we believe to be reasonable measures to address potential impacts to a critically endangered species in the Gulf of Mexico. We are tied up in litigation in several cases around these lease sales. But from BOEM's perspective, again, we share NOAA's concerns about the status of this critically endangered species. And right now, there are recommended measures that companies can take. And I know that from speaking to oil and gas companies, they share our concerns about making sure that their activities are done in a sustainable, safe, and environmentally protective way. So we hope we can continue to work forward to make sure that this species doesn't go extinct on our watch.
So as we've heard then from Senator Hyde-Smith, Senator Murkowski, Senator Cassidy, offshore energy production is critically important to our U.S. economy and our U.S. national security. The decision that you make have enormous consequences for this country, for coastal states, for American workers. I know you have a lot of concerns about the globe. I'm talking about American coastal states, American workers, American citizens, our country, where affordable energy matters. Would you support legislation requiring the Senate to confirm the person who holds your position, the Director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management? Because right now, it's not a confirmable position.
Well, thank you for the question. And as always, my Bureau and the Department of Interior and the administration stands ready to provide technical assistance to any proposed legislation that is put before us and provide administration positions. So we're ready to do that if there's a proposal.
So you don't have a
to us.
vision of whether that should be a confirmable position or not in terms of the role that it plays in our nation's economy and the jobs?
Right now, personally, I am focused on doing the best job that I can as Director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and implementing the President's agenda to address climate change and ensure that the federal government is doing something to address that crisis.
So along that line, the 30 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2030, the Biden administration has set that goal. You're involved in generating 30 gigawatts of electricity from offshore wind by the year 2030. So 2 weeks ago, Politico ran a story. Mr. Chairman, I asked it submitted to the record. The headline, Pipe Dream. Biden's offshore wind plan takes a hit. A quarter of the power planned from ocean turbines by 2030 is facing delays and cancellations. The about 7.5 gigawatts. The article quotes an analyst from Bloomberg New Energy Finance saying U.S. targets are further from reality. I've been saying it was a pipe dream at the beginning of the year. My opinion is even stronger today. So when are you going to end the happy talk and admit that 30 gigawatts is not going to be available by 2030? And don't you really owe the country frank and candid assessment as energy prices continue to go up, as your role makes us less reliant on affordable, available energy and more focused on what is a pipe dream? And, you know, we have people responsible for keeping the lights on, and we're not being helped along the way by misleading the public. So when are you going to fess up and admit that you're not going to meet the goals that you've decided upon or are so critical?
Well, thank you for the question. I think at BOEM, we really we believe in American ingenuity, innovation, and hard work. We're rolling up our sleeves to make sure that we can work through the hard problems associated with the build-out of a brand-new industry here in the U.S. We hear from folks every day about how they believe that the transition to cleaner energy sources, including offshore wind, which is the only industrial-scale clean energy source available to certain East Coast communities, I believe that these are hard problems, and we have the ability to work through them. We already have 2 projects that are under construction, another 2 that have been approved, and we have approximately 27 gigawatts in the pipeline with more to come in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, and I know that